everyone. The paper that I'm going to present today is on the perceptions of an enabling business environment in Barbados. Okay, depending on the level of uncertainty faced by businesses and the level of capacity of the government and its ministries to adapt the rules of doing business in a particular country, the mix between private sector and public sector intervention in fostering an enabling environment for industrial development really varies. There exists a number of anecdotal evidence that uncertainty of laws, policies, regulations, and various procedures limit business development in many small island developing states. Barbados is no different to any of these developing states. It is known that despite globalization and fierce competition, the informal sector plays an important role in poverty alleviation and income generation. In addition, much has been advocated about institutional infrastructure and capacity, some of the points made by other speakers earlier today. There is, however, a shortcoming in the research, as most entrepreneurship and business theories focus on micro-level influences on entrepreneurial behavior, taking the external environment, including institutions, as a given. This paper is going to focus quite a bit on the external environment and the impact of government on small business development and on entrepreneurship. In addition, there's a growing consensus among practitioners and researchers alike that are specific and striving business sector is crucial to economic growth, and that certain business-friendly conditions are mandatory in order to stimulate dynamism within the business sector. The institutional theory also draws attention to laws and regulations, economic factors, and policies which exert influence on business behavior, an area that this paper will also focus on, drawing on work from Oliver 1991 and North 1990. They highlight that institutional theory considers processes by which structures, including schemes, rules, regulations, become authoritative guides that would help in terms of the development of businesses. So, what is an enabling environment? Okay, the index of economic freedom describes an enabling environment as one that has little government intervention in the economy, liberal trade policy, low physical burden, free capital flows, banking and finance, unrestricted but controlled foreign investment, market-based wages and prices, and secure property rights. The Doing Business report that we've heard a lot about just now describes an enabling environment based on the ease of starting a business, hiring and firing workers, getting credit, enforcing contracts, closing a business, registering property, and dealing with licenses and trading across borders. In general, the principles of an enabling environment stem from a reduction in government intervention, the creation of a level playing field without distortions, avoiding excessive regulation, sector and region-specific support. Taking the neoclassical view into consideration, proponents of the neoclassical approach to business enabling environment assume that most market factors, work reasonably well without government intervention if property rights and competition are actually guaranteed. Such interventions are in most cases considered less efficient than market-based solutions, if it's stressed that many government interventions in fact get in the way of private sector development. The non-structuralist view, whereas analysts from a neo-structuralist or evolutionary background stress the role of additional determinants in explaining private sector dynamism, and especially the ability to upgrade and build knowledge-based competitive advantages. Aside from a few exceptions, they do not deny the relevance of any of the elements highlighted in the Doing Business reports. The key difference lies in their assumption that market failure is pervasive and governments have a more active role to play in correcting such market failure. The risk of government failure and politically well-connected actors in the private sector is acknowledged, but the consequence is to establish checks and balances rather than not addressing market failures at all. In regards to making a decision as to the way forward, we've identified some government constraints based on information gathering from a few key government officials in the various ministries. When the Barbados government was looking for means to stimulate economic growth, it based most of its initiatives on a way to overcome a set of constraints that were looming over the industry development in the 1990s. The main constraints identified included weaknesses in enabling policy and regulatory framework in most of the infrastructure sectors. There was a need to make sector policies and regulations that are small and medium-sized business friendly, inadequate instruments and capacity to meet medium and long-term equity and debt financing needed for capital investment in innovative business projects. There was a lack of capacity in public institutions and officials to manage the expectations of the new enabling business process. There was a lack of capacity in the private sector to fully meet the challenges of investing in a number of new projects that had social implications. And then on the other hand, we identified some business constraints that were identified. So whereas the immediate constraints identified by the local business sector include the high price of raw materials, the high price of productive equipment, high overhead and variable costs, low staff productivity, a lack of government assistance, difficulty in obtaining finance, the high level of competition from low quality, cheap imports, mainly from the Far East. So you can see that there are a set of differing constraints in terms of what the businesses were actually looking at, trying to resolve, and the things or the issues that government thought were impeding business development. In terms of addressing these constraints, there were 4 areas that I concentrated on. One is infrastructure, especially as it related to institutional capacity. The other is education. Then there's a legal framework, and then trade and investment. To address the identified constraints, several policies and initiatives have been introduced by the government of Barbados and the local NGOs to create a vibrant and enabling environment that spurs innovation, entrepreneurship, and business development. The emphasis of the work explored here relates to the institutional theory and its relations to business, government, and society, as highlighted by many books, Steiner and Steiner, Scott 2001, Scott 2003, which stresses policy analysis and the importance of government in terms of stimulating business development and growth. Now I'll just look at some of the areas that we concentrated on in Barbados and explain to you some of the things that we introduced to enhance business development and create an enabling environment. As it relates to infrastructure, we had the establishment of the Barbados Small Business Development Unit within the Ministry of Commerce, Consumer Affairs. That happened in 1995. Then we had 2 commissions, one for the rural development, one for the urban development. That also started up in 1996 and 1997, respectively. Those were basically units that were set up to help develop small business and entrepreneurship in the relevant areas. Then one of the big ones that we had was when the Barbados Development Bank was dissolved or broken down into some smaller institutions. We had the Enterprise Growth Fund, which was formulated in 98, and we had Fund Access, which was set up in 97. Actually, no, sorry, 98 as well. Enterprise Growth Fund offering large sums of funds, debt as well as equity, whereas Fund Access offering funds to the micro and the informal sector. Then we had the establishment of the Small Business Development Center of the BIDC, which basically was set up to help facilitate enterprise development through the utilization of an incubator, an innovation support program, as well as a small export readiness program. And then in most recent times, we had the establishment of the Barbados Entrepreneurship Foundation, Inc. in 2010-2011. As it relates to education, this was done on various levels. So we had educational programs set up through the Youth Entrepreneurship Scheme, as well as through the Barbados Youth, Barbados Youth and Business Trust. Then at the university, we had the development of a Bachelor of Science in Management, specializing in entrepreneurship. We also had at the Cavell School of Business a Center for Enterprise and Entrepreneurship that was also set up. The establishment within the last year of a Master's in Entrepreneurship, as well as an MBA program, and you can also do a doctoral program specializing or focusing on entrepreneurship as well. Then we have the enactment of the Small Business Development Act, which started in 1999 with a series of amendments over the last 10 years. And then a set of physical incentives basically geared towards offering physical incentives for enclave industries to promote export readiness and exports outside of the CARICOM and further abroad. In relation to trade and investment, we had the introduction of the Export Credit Insurance Scheme. We had the introduction of the Enhanced Credit Guarantee Scheme, the Export Finance Guarantee Scheme, the introduction of a Productivity and Innovation Index, which is probably one of the most recent things that we've introduced. And this is basically geared towards financing, process innovation, organizational innovation, as well as service innovation. And we heard a little bit about organizational innovation just now from one of the previous speakers. So through this particular fund, persons will get a tax credit of 25%, okay, off of their expenditure or their spending. In terms of looking at factors affecting the way forward, now there are like three things that I thought that was most relevant in terms of identifying the best way forward for a small island developing state similar to Barbados based on some of our best practices. And the first thing relates to global fairness. Okay, thus far the benefits of globalization have been unevenly spread. Most big investments tend to go to just a few, mainly big businesses. However, it's not prudent to say that globalization is to blame for this unfairness, nor would it be prudent to say that globalization will remove this unfairness. What can be said is that if global fairness is not adopted as a key factor in taking advantage of globalization, a harsh paradox will appear. Okay, countries like Barbados and other small island developing states would have to choose between integrating a global economy versus reducing the level of their individual domestic development. The other issue relates to global responsibility. This takes into consideration the connections between business actions and their results. Businesses and governments must now work more feverishly to demonstrate more global responsibility. Global responsibility has been interpreted to mean that it should become the norm when globalized businesses to observe the sound principles of environmental management, the sustainable harvesting of natural resources, the reduction of waste materials and emissions, and the reduction in energy consumption. Businesses can no longer, therefore, encourage investment for the long term with rules which are geared to speculation for the short term. In relation to some of the success stories that we've identified in Barbados, I've basically just identified three industries, but one which is probably the most dominant one that everybody here will know about is the one which deals with rum manufacturing. Now, we've been very successful in terms of our exports and generating foreign direct investment and foreign exchange through our rum industry. Another one which is probably not as prevalent in this area is the solar industry, because you guys have cheap energy in Trinidad. But the solar industry has been another area which we have identified quite a few best practices with maybe 5 to 7 companies practicing or manufacturing solar panel companies and doing hot water heating and so on. And then the third one is the offshore banking and insurance, okay, where we use that to generate foreign direct investment. In terms of the critical success factors, there are 4 areas that I've identified. The first one is political stability and security. The Barbados governments over the last 20 years have shown much stability and steadfastness in running the country. Because of the democracy in Barbados is such that the country has 2 main parties vying for leadership at each election. However, they kind of carry the same goals as different political parties. The other one is government-business interface. The Barbados government has recognized the adaptation of standardized best practices in the administration of regulations. Okay, they have identified that standardization provides a benchmark that individual agencies have to achieve in administering their rules. In terms of law enforcement and bureaucratic red tape, clarity around some of the laws and enforcement rules have continued to remain a challenge for some businesses. And in relation to efficiency of government in providing services, the primary purpose of government is really to maintain and improve the well-being of citizens and businesses by providing services. While the Barbados government has undergone some levels of reform, there's still much that needs to be done in terms of identification of the goals that have been achieved in the last 5 to 10 years based on the initiatives identified. In terms of conclusions and recommendations, all right, The initiatives and policies which formulate the framework for an enabling business environment in Barbados are all dynamic processes. Adapting and/or applying the framework in full or in part will be challenging, as other small island development states have their own realities and may find it difficult to keep abreast of the ever-changing regulatory frameworks. Besides governmental monitoring and enforcement on a daily basis, small island developing states will have to adapt to new enabling climate with less expertise, fewer resources, and less formal structures and capacity that is required in order to stimulate success. And then in terms of future research or future areas where I think that we can probably do some additional investigation, investigate government efficiency in delivering pre- and post-recession business services. So see how we were operating prior to the current recession, and then see how we are operating through the current recession, and then see how we'll operate post-recession. Observing transaction costs versus uncertainty in complying with government rules and regulations. Currently, a lot of businesses are saying that the reason why they don't comply because it's too costly to comply. And then the final one basically is a review of the impact of policies on the business environment. However, many of the above studies would lead to a greater understanding of the enabling business supply environment and allow for clarification of whether the benefits that they actually claim are actually justified. Thank you.